this is JJ Humphrey. We're back on Elephant in the Room. Man, we have got a hot topic today. Very, very proud to have Kadie with us with explain your news. Explain that one more time for us.
Oh, the name of the outlet?
Yes.
Yes. So visit V1SUT. It is investigative journalism. So it's not overtly religious, but I believe that truth is of God. And whenever Jesus is talking in the Gospels, those red letters in the Bible, and he's about to drop a really big truth that you need to listen to, he prefaces it with, "Verily I say unto thee." And then he drops a bomb of truth. So it's an acronym for that, V1SUT, and there's only one Jesus, so the I is a one.
Awesome, man. I like that.
You didn't know that. You didn't know that, JJ?
Well, you know what? I learned something new every day, Bob.
Well,
Hey,
even
Bob,
I knew that.
we've got a huge segment today that we want to jump right into. So I'm going to be real quick with our pet peeve today. We always start off with the pet peeve for the day. So my pet peeve today is when politicians and judges collaborate to destroy a grand jury and then file a sanction of $50,000 on poor old JJ. So Bob, they tried to sanction me for filing a grand jury. Now there's 16 people on the grand jury, but why do they pick me? People always picking on me, Bob. Why do I stand out in the crowd? You know, that's my pet peeve. Why JJ? Why is it just me that gets sued or sanctioned for $50,000? $50,000 sounds a little steep, Bob, for trying to enforce your constitutional rights. What do you think, brother?
No, I don't think that's out of the question. I didn't know about that till just you started talking about it. You didn't tell me that.
It's a little, hey, Bob, it's inflation. I guess they sanction on inflation.
Well, they just, well, I get on with our guest there because I've been really curious about this.
Yep. This is a big deal. Guys, if you will remember that you came and joined us, it's been a little while ago.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. And so what we had a girl that was using drugs, and her and her boyfriend, she got pregnant. So she did the right thing, checked herself into a rehab and stayed at the rehab 9 months. Now, last I checked, that's a pretty good mom that puts, you know, her use behind her baby. So she did exactly what a good mom would do. Checked herself in when she was getting ready to deliver, shows up at the hospital. DHS shows up with no authority. Why is DHS even there? They take the baby without authority. They don't have proper hearings. They give the baby to a same-sex couple without the knowledge of these two parents. The two parents go to all the stuff that DHS, jump through all the hoops that DHS is having them do. They decide to take their kid back one day on a visit. Police had to get called. They take the kid again. The whole process starts. They quit letting them see visits. And the next thing, these two same-sex couples go off on a cruise, and one of them gets involved in molesting other kids. Mm-hmm. They bring him back home, fly all of them back home, and he ends up killing himself. That's what we believe. Killing himself due to they were going to arrest him. The other dude takes the child and runs off. Now we find out that we had a few sexual crimes going on before all this happened. And so I think that's a pretty good rundown of what your last visit was. But now you've got a whole new story to tell us. So how about just filling us in what you've picked up on that story and let us know what you found out?
Well, you're right. I've been following the story since the spring of 2024. And it happened when some parents from Moore Public Schools reached out to me. I was doing a lot of reporting on sex offenders within our public school system. And they reported that a 6th grade teacher had been forced to step down out on paid leave, and nobody was telling the parents why. The 6th grade teacher was emergency certified, had been there for 2 years, so had worked with a lot of kids. Parents had concerns about this teacher, and they wanted to know why he was now out of the classroom. No one was telling them. So they reached out to me. So I started looking into it, found out he was married to another man. There was a child in the household, a small child. And I reached out to DHS and was trying to find out, where did this child come from? Of course, DHS says, we can't talk to you about any of it. We can't say whether we've ever been involved with this child or not, all kinds of things like that. Privacy laws that tend to protect the agency more than the child. Well, this man had gone on a cruise, all three of them, both men and this child were on a cruise. They were on the Carnival Dream. And he was accused of molesting some children. And we didn't know much about it. The federal indictment that came down in federal court had it as a John Doe as the victim, which I would do the same thing if I was a family. I'd be protecting my child. Just recently, continuing to pull on threads in this case and not let it go and just dig for information, I was able to locate the families that were on this cruise ship. And we found out exactly. I got to talk to 3 different parents that were involved in this group of about 40 people that all went together from different states, met in Galveston, got on this cruise ship. There were about 13 children with them between the ages of 10 and 17. And because they all knew each other and you're in a fixed environment on a cruise ship, they were letting the kids move around the ship in groups without the parents, which is really common. So on the evening of March 20th, after dark, up on the deck, the kids were all near the hot tub. And one of the men was up there with this small child that they had, we did find out, adopted from DHS. Not only did he was very, very drunk. If you go to the article at V1SUT.com, it's the lead article right now with this new information. The kids thought it was so funny that they videotaped this gentleman falling all over on the deck, so incredibly intoxicated. The kids said that Carnival just kept feeding him alcohol, even though he was well past legally drunk. Eventually, he ends up in the hot tub with these children, and he's got this boy who is his adopted child. His name is Lincoln Lockman, and he tried to drown the child in the hot tub in front of these children. The child kept coming up sputtering. The kids that were in the hot tub said that he held him down multiple times for more than a minute. He came up choking and screaming. And a woman who I have not been able to identify, the kids said that she was a blonde woman that they did not know, came running over, jumped in, and struck the gentleman and saved this child's life. So as she's doing that, then he becomes belligerent with these children, and he starts telling the kids that are in the hot tub, who are unknown to him. When he first got in, he got all of their information. He was very friendly. He said, I'm a teacher. The kids were talking to him. They thought he was funny before he attempted to drown his adopted son. He asked them where they went to school and where they lived. And the kids told him, as kids will do. And then it turned dark. He would not let them leave the hot tub. The kids, all their stories after they were interviewed corroborated one another. A couple of very brave boys in the group helped the girls get out at certain points. And then it came down to one child who helped his last friend get out. He was 11 years old. And the man is reported to have grabbed him by the shoulders and said, not you, little boy, you're staying with me. Now, he had already tried to grope the private parts of other boys in the hot tub. And he got this kid at the end, and he molested him on top of his clothing. The indictment says up his swim shorts. This kid had to fight to get away. So this was a terrifying experience. They also gave in their statements that another man passenger, once security finally did arrive and the kids got out of the hot tub, approached the man who was the perpetrator and also struck him. So there were a lot of people on the boat that knew what was happening. So I'm interviewing 2 of the moms, and 2 of the moms were downstairs during this time. They were down in their cabin on the cabin level, and they got a call from Carnival Cruise Ship security. And they told them, we're bringing your son down. This one woman, they called one woman and said, we're bringing your son down. It was the 11-year-old who took the bulk of the abuse. And they said, he has something to tell you. So the mother assumed the kids had gotten in trouble. They were going around the ship. They'd gotten in trouble. By the time they got down there, she gathered the parents in this group and they met them in the hallway outside the cabin. Well, the security wanted to push them into the cabin. They said, we can't talk about this out here. Right at the time when more security was bringing the perpetrator down the same hallway to put him in his cabin. So they interviewed all of the children. They had the same story. Carnival Cruise said, we're going to post a guard outside this guy's door. He's going to be arrested. We're going to notify the FBI. And so the family felt secure that law enforcement was going to be notified. The next morning, they docked in Cozumel. Carnival let the two men with the child, and here, this was an attempted drowning. We have no evidence that the child ever got any medical attention. No one can testify to the fact that anyone did anything for him or that he was ever removed from these men or the threat. They let them off in Cozumel first thing in the morning. They held all of the parents in this group of children who were the victims on the ship and said, now you're going to have to interview with our sort of second in command on the ship. So they missed the whole morning in Cozumel. They were going through interviews while these men, who I assumed in my initial reporting had been arrested and flown back by authorities, were let go in Cozumel. Other passengers saw them walking around in Cozumel, and then they never got back on the ship. I do not know how they got home. I do not know any of that. But these parents were so persistent about seeking justice for their children and about protecting this little boy that was with these men that they wouldn't let go. They hazed security through the rest of the time. One of the moms said we were loud and they tried to shut us up. They told us not to talk about it in public. One of the moms, her father, who was not with them, has lifelong involved in law enforcement like you are. And she was on the phone with him. He was sort of coaching them about what to do, what to say, what they should be providing them as proof that this man is being arrested. So as soon as they docked and they got back to Galveston, after the cruise had said, okay, enough, don't bother us. Once they got off in Mexico, there's nothing we can do. That was the message that they were given. Soon as these families docked, before they even got to their cars, when they got back to Galveston, Texas, they called the FBI. And the cruise line had never notified the FBI like they were supposed to. So this whole thing was going to be swept under the rug. They were offering free cruises to the parents. They were trying to cover it up, and these families were not having it. The good news is these families said when they called the FBI immediately, 2 agents were assigned to the case. They said they were exemplary. Within 3 days, they had interviewed all of their children. Again, all their stories corroborated. They talked about the attempted drowning. They talked about the molestations. They talked about his state of drunkenness. And then they continued as they investigated to keep the families completely apprised of what was going on. So that part of it was good. It was the FBI, we're told now, who contacted more public schools. And the FBI also, as required by law, contacted the Oklahoma Department of Human Services, because now we have a child at risk of harm. Why the child was not removed at the time, I do not know. I cannot explain it.
I want to say this. You know how many cases, and I know you work a lot of DHS cases, so I know it's like me telling the choir, preaching the choir, but how many cases have we heard of kids being removed from the home for some mother who had a guy there that either molested kids or was abusive, and then they took the kid from the mother because she failed to protect when maybe she's being abused as well. You know, again, it's just amazing to me how DHS. Now, let me ask you, I'm already thinking of why I think that DHS would not pursue that in this case. It would not try to get that child away from that other person. But what's your thoughts on that? Why do you think?
What I think from looking into a lot of cases is that we have a protected class within foster and adoptive parenting now. Same sex
yes class. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes. And if we go back to when Lincoln Lockman was born, and as you said, I don't think it was 9 months, but the mom was involved with the STAR program, which is a taxpayer. She found out she was pregnant. She did have a history of addiction. So she made sure she went and she got this treatment. And the STAR clinic helps moms if they are actively using. They help them to stop using. If they're not, and they just have a history of abuse, they give all of them this top level prenatal care. What we want is a healthy baby. They are mandated to work with DHS. And the whole point of the program is to get healthy kids here and keep from having to remove them from their parents.
Sure.
So this clinic uses our tax dollars to work with the parents after to follow this through. So this mom did really well. The plan was, she was clean. The plan was to send this baby home and to support it. It's a very successful program. It has about an 85% success rate of keeping babies with their moms. Well, for some reason, it was during COVID. It was December of 2020. And when they called OU Children's, where Star is, and said, hey, she's in labor, let's get this plan going. They said, you can't have the baby here. We've got all these things going on with COVID. Go to your local hospital. So they went to Norman Regional, and Norman Regional asked her all the questions. She was very honest. She said, I have a history of drug abuse. I'm not actively using drugs. They did all of the testing. She and the baby were both negative for everything, even the umbilical cord, which is a longer historical record of what's going on with drug use. So this mom was telling the truth. They knew she was in treatment. So let me ask you this. Why does a hospital who has a healthy full-term baby and a mom that has all of these supports, and the mom and baby test negatively, why do they contact DHS and make a referral?
Right. And here's the other question I've got. I thought that we were protected under HIPAA, because when you call DHS to try to get information, either as even as a legislator, oh, that's under HIPAA. Oh, that's under investigation. Oh, that's mental health. Oh, that's under the Kids Act, that we can't tell you because they're underage. They will not give you one bit of information. So how is it that the hospital is giving, now if there was some harm being done to the kid, I would see that they have a duty to report, but where's the harm? Why would you contact DHS if the kid's not born on drugs? If if you want to, hey, I know this is going to shock everybody. Y'all get a hold to your seat, but old JJ was not always the saint that you see today. Okay. I used to be a little rowdy. I know Bob won't believe that, but, I was a little rowdy, and I might have done a drug or two, back in the day. So if you want to say, hey, I got a history of drug use.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's insane. So, it is. The fact that I used to drink a fifth a day, okay, I can say that. I ain't drinking 40 something years. Guess what? Should I be held accountable on what I did when I was 18, 19, 20.
Now, one of those guys, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the guy who's a teacher in Moore, he killed himself. Is that correct?
He did. Right. So after the cruise ship, and I know there's some hopping around here, so let me be really specific. This is in 2024. They go on the cruise in March of 2024. The FBI investigates for a couple of months. They indict him. He has to step down immediately in March from Moore Public Schools. And that's when these two agencies, Moore Public Schools and DHS, are notified of everything that went on. So he steps down then. In June, he's indicted. His emergency teaching certification goes on the agenda at the State Board of Education for revocation, for suspension and revocation under Ryan Walter's administration. And then 9 days after the indictment, one day before that state board meeting, he reportedly commits suicide with a gun in the home in Moore that he continued to share with his husband and child Lincoln. So we know he was never removed. We have a police report that says that's where that happened, and these are the folks that still live in the household. So we know DHS never removed him, despite knowing everything that happened on the cruise ship. And this is where I'm getting into the protected class. We start to see all the way through the case when Lincoln was an infant and handed straight to these men from the hospital, in a huge overreach by the hospital and an even bigger overreach by DHS when they became involved. They went to a court. They got an emergency custody order based on drug use, and they failed to inform the court that mom and baby tested negatively for all drugs and that she was involved in this program. That is a massive lie of omission to the court. That's how this baby immediately went to these men from the hospital. We do know this. These men had also fostered at least 6, I'm told more, but 6 that I know of, boys in their household. They requested only boys be put in the household, and DHS didn't see that as a red flag. They said, sure, we'll fill the order. So later—
Has anybody followed up with those 6 kids to see if there's any sexual abuse? Do you know that?
We've asked. So as soon as I knew about this case, I'm a mandated reporter under law. I made referrals to the OKDHS child abuse hotline. So did the parents eventually contacted me partway through this reporting, the biological parents. They did as well. And they screened us out. So if you're the one calling and reporting and you identify yourself instead of being anonymous, you can call back and they have to tell you what the disposition of that referral is. So I've said this child's at harm. I call back in a little bit. They have to tell me, did we screen it out? Are we investigating it? And they just screened them out. No one was going to look at this.
Now that's important because so our listeners understand. We have a hotline that you can call when you suspect or when you know abuse. You call it. As we just said, if you want to give your name, you can, and then you keep track of it. If you want to be anonymous, then you call in and you leave it. But by law, and this is under the Kelsey-Briggs Act, I believe, but by law, they have to refer that to a law enforcement officer. What they're saying is, well, we screened it out. So they're violating the law by screening these out. And I went and looked at that. And I mean, it was an astronomical, it was thousands of cases that they're screening out illegally, in my opinion. And so again, we have this hotline that's supposed to be all this great thing, but in reality, what's happening, people are calling in and they're just going, well, that don't meet criteria, that don't meet criteria. And we're kicking it to law enforcement when we find that it's legit, and then we'll send it. But for I want to say for 75,000, it was like 14,000 that they actually referred. And I'd have to go back and look those numbers, but it was pretty astronomical.
Now,
It is.
correct me if I'm wrong on this one. The one guy who committed suicide, who was a school teacher in Moore, he had trouble before. This wasn't his first rodeo. But our education, whoever's supposed to be checking, he came in from another state. Is that correct? And they didn't go to the other state to look at his record to see what it was. Is that correct?
That's partially correct. So he did. He was arrested in 2010 in Kansas. And in my second article about this case, I reported that. The only evidence of that is in the local paper in this little Labette County, Kansas, which was far southeast Kansas, in this little town called Parsons, Kansas, where he was arrested. The little paper had a blurb and it said, this man was arrested, age 22, for twice providing alcohol to and twice sodomizing a child. Okay. So I go looking for record of that. There's nothing in court records. I start throwing open records requests. The sheriff won't give me anything. I push it all the way up because they have county attorneys there. I push it all the way up to the Attorney General of Kansas, who won't even acknowledge my rightful open records request, right? As soon as I start poking around, I screenshotted it, so I've got it. The local paper pulled down that reference from their archives. They also pulled down another reference that showed this man once then he married this other younger man who was on the ship with him. It was sort of a human interest story about how they were at a church and they were doing a Thanksgiving dinner for the youth. So we know that they were involved with church at youth. The newspaper pulled all of that out of their archives when I started poking around. Well, just very recently, so this is the new information in the latest article that came out last week, I was able to finally get someone that had solid knowledge of what happened in 2010 in Parsons, Kansas with him to talk to me. They wanted protection of anonymity. I get it. You got to live in a small community and these people were pretty protected. But what we know now is those crimes against that child took place at a church camp while that man, the perpetrator, was a camp counselor. And from this source said he was very protected because his family of origin was very involved in the religious community. His mother has an organization that she speaks at a lot of the missions sort of conferences. She writes books. The organization encourages people to raise mission-minded children locally and globally. It's called See Local Global. And so she had a lot of influence in the community, and they said that they protected this man and decided not to believe this child. Well, looking back at his actions later on, that we should have believed this child and he should not have been protected. So let me say this about more public schools. More public schools, and this is the danger within our system where government institutions don't protect kids. JJ knows this. If you just did a regular background check on him, if they saved him from prosecution or he was able to get it expunged, it's not going to show up.
Yeah, but the problem is, and again, I have an issue with more public schools covering it up and trying to hide it. I do have an issue with that. I don't so much have an issue on the background, but also, we should be going after Kansas because I don't know the law in Kansas. I can tell you the law in Oklahoma, because the law in Oklahoma says that we can't give a deferred or an expungement or any, on sex crimes. It's not supposed to. I have seen it.
Right.
And again, they're not legal, but you're not supposed to give that. But I was involved in a case where we caught a guy posing as a cameraman for that was a Nazarene church, and he had about 175 kids in a notebook that he'd gotten all from that, what he liked about them, pictures, it's pretty scary stuff. And that church, not one single church, but the congregational president called me and said, "Hey, we don't want this going out." They were going to try to cover the whole thing up. And I was like, "Hey, it ain't going to happen." It is unbelievable that these people that are in these positions, superintendents, pastors, that will try to cover up child abuse. And again, it's not just covering that child's abuse, but we need to get out and find out, did they abuse other children?
Exactly.
We need to find out what's going on.
Exactly. Like every parent, when he stepped down and that the school district knew that something had happened with this man as far as crimes to children, every parent has the right to have the conversation with their 6th grade kid that was in his class for a year to say, did anything happen to you? Right. And we know kids don't talk about it, but they didn't have that opportunity until much later, until the reporting, until they started to hear about these things. And here's the other part that really, really concerns me. So DHS is screening out all these referrals, and mine and the parents were not the only one. There were lots of other referrals, and they just kept screening them out about this man. And I believe it's because DHS put this child in that home. If this had been a natural child of someone and they'd gotten the same reports about a parent, I don't care if they're straight or gay, who had done this on a cruise ship, they would be there in a New York minute. But they put these foster children and then this adopted child into the home. So they're culpable for this, and they're never going to come forward and investigate it. We see it over and over. Here's the other thing. When you become a foster parent, and so this is part that that I should probably reiterate. I worked in the child welfare system. I am a decreed journalist, but there was a time when it was a calling and things were a mess, and we were involved with some state custody kids, and I just felt like I needed to. And I went and did frontline child welfare. I also worked at the state office of DHS. Then I got recruited over to the State Department of Education under Joy Hoffmeister. So where kids meet government, I can tell you where it goes wrong.
Did you say joyless or joy?
Something like that. I don't know. Is she a Republican or Democrat?
Bob calls her. Well, she don't know neither. She don't know whether she is, but Bob calls her joyless Hofschuster. Okay. So
that's a good one.
Go ahead.
Very Trumpian. But if you think about the process of vetting to become a foster parent, it's not just a background check. I have helped people who were, say, a grandparent of a child that came into custody fill out this paperwork so we can get the child placed with them and keep it with family. Yes, you have to do a background check. Yes, you have to do the fingerprint federal check. But you also fill out an application where you are asked, have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been arrested for a crime against children? So on their application, these two men, both to foster and adopt, they either lied and committed a crime to get access to other people's children, or they told the truth and DHS glossed it over and said you weren't convicted.
But here's the deal, and I've done 10,000 background checks. Now, and again, mine were a little more intense because we had people that had committed felonies and now the courts are ordering me find out, is there anything else in their record, find out what's going on. But I can tell you, I would think you would do a pretty thorough background check. I mean, I would be going out and doing home visits. I would be going out and checking jobs. I mean, if I'm doing an interview to put kids in a home, I can tell you I've done some from Missouri where they wanted something done in where they had somebody from Oklahoma and they would hire me to go out and do what they called a home check or and I'd have to write up a full report on. But when you interview people and you ask those questions that you're talking about, and they teach you how to interview people and how to have open and closed conversations and all kinds of stuff. But anyways, one of the things you learn, I mean, is how to ask a question that will bring out and get them talking. And when you do ask a specific closed-in question, like you just asked, have you ever been convicted of sex crime? That's a very direct, closed-in question, but you watch that person answer, because if they have, they're going to move, they're going to do something, they're going to avert, they're going to, no, So again, when you see those kind of behaviors, hey, let's spend a little more time. Let's look on this thing.
What do you think?
Also, you find out where they're from, and you start looking. This stuff is not that. I mean, again, it can be missed if they delete it all. It's understandable, but it sure doesn't sound like anybody did their job.
Well, and it's worse than have you been convicted. The question is, like, they're going to find out about your convictions. They're going to do the background check, and if you've been convicted, they're going to find out. The question is, were you ever arrested for a crime against children? Other question, have you ever been arrested, and for what? This man was arrested for providing alcohol to and twice raping a child. That is the truth. So whatever they answered on the application, if they were truthful, DHS decided it didn't matter. And if they lied, they committed a crime to gain access to other people's children. Now, here's the tough part. One of those men still has this child. This child is 5 years old. We now know this man tried to drown him. The one man tried to drown him and molested other children and was arrested for sex crimes against children. And yet somehow, and the other man failed to protect. Did they lie on these applications? Isn't that crime enough that someone needs to go hunt down this child and pull him away? Shouldn't we be having someone arrested for doing that to gain access to vulnerable children? And isn't DHS culpable for failing to protect?
Well, I would say, first of all, did they kidnap? I would say, did DHS kidnap? And here's the other thing. What's the push? Because this is not the first time. This is a push to put kids in same-sex homes. Now, there's a push to do that. And again, that's problematic. That's huge problematic. Second is, I want to know, how much money are they receiving to get these kids in the home? And does DHS receive money for those? Does the hospital receive money for that call? Is that same-sex couple receiving money for the kid? Where's all the money? And is it yes, yes, yes? Do you hit all three of those whistles? That's what I would like to know, because that's what we got to start tracking. We're seeing these kind of problems in other states. I want to know, what are we doing? And again, I believe that's where we need to really start drilling down on, because that's probably at the heart of this problem.
I would agree. And again, I don't care who you are. You're a heterosexual couple. You're a same-sex couple. DHS, in 2015, the Supreme Court said same-sex marriage is the law of the land. Oklahomans didn't vote for that, but it came to Oklahoma. And what we're seeing is, not only did the most radicalized portion of the gay and lesbian community say, okay, you can't keep us off the list now for getting these kids, they formed nonprofits to specifically recruit LGBT parents. We see people who work within DHS who are also involved with these nonprofits that are bringing those families in at a higher rate. We also see LGBT folks that work for DHS, even at very high levels, ending up with other people's kids in their home adopted forever. That is a massive conflict of interest.
That's a huge conflict. But here's where I'm at. So first number, I like to look at stuff like this. So first number I'd like to look at is, let's look at what population does homosexuals make up. Let's say that it may be 10%. I think it's less than 10, but even if it's 10%, then are we adopting kids at 10% rate? Or are we adopting kids to same-sex couples at 30% rate?
That's, I can tell you that
we need to look at, because I suspect it's much, much higher. In fact, I would suspect probably double the amount if I was betting. Because and again, I've not specifically went and pulled these numbers, but I'm working all the time and getting reports, and it's just, how does this keep happening and these problems? Second, based on my 35 years of dealing with people who have trauma, dealing with a lot of people that are hetero and homosexual, but rarely, and it's not uncommon. In fact, it's more uncommon to not see this, but a lot of people who are homosexual were molested at an age, or encountered some kind of sexual trauma at an early age. And again, I would say, and you can get mad at me, I don't care. What I'm saying is absolutely true based on my experience, and I've done this for a while, is that puts them at a higher risk. So again, I would think that you would really be looking very, very closely at those. And why are we giving much more, leeway to what I would say would be a higher risk group than other groups? And so again, it's pretty disturbing to me.
Well, I want to talk to both of the points that you just made. So in this particular case, the man who still has Andrew and Gardenia Lockman's son, Lincoln, his name is Ryan Harrison, used to be Ryan McManigal. It was also Ryan Hollenbeck. He is significantly younger than his spouse who committed suicide. And that news source that I told you about that was able to fill in the blanks about what happened with the 2010 arrest and tell us that it was at a church camp, a religious camp, and that he was a counselor at the time. That source was also able to say that that younger man that he eventually married was growing up in a group home in Parsons, Kansas. So there's a group home there. I ran into an article that said that they've had over 1,000 boys go through that group home in this little town in the last 20 years. So it was kind of bragging about what they do there. We know this family, and this man was very involved in missions in the area. And now the source says that they started a relationship when this kid was still a teen. That's when they met. He was a ward of the state. He was a ward of the state almost his entire life, from what the source could tell me. And that he'd been briefly adopted, and that's why he had one name, and then he was put into this group home. So we're talking about a kid, like you said, that had a lot of trauma. So we're actually talking about a perpetrator who married what looks like one victim, and then was given at least half a dozen other fosters, and then became a teacher and had access to lots of kids. And then they ended up with Lincoln in their home, adopted. So you have two levels of victimization here that I think we need to look at. And then the other thing that you said that's so interesting, and there's a new documentary about it starts out about the medical kidnapping that we've been seeing, even in Oklahoma. I've covered a lot of that, where DHS is reaching in. It's financially beneficial for the hospitals. Parents, we don't care how you want to treat. We don't care what your religious beliefs are. You're wrong. We're taking your kid and we're treating them however we want in the hospital. So Absolutely. It starts out with that, but then it starts to look at how a disproportionate number of kids are going to gay, lesbian, trans households within the system. And it actually looked at how social workers within the child welfare system, who belong to this sort of more radicalized LGBT group, are taking these kids home. And what it said was that there's a that kids right now in the system are 7 times more likely to go to an LGBT foster home than to a traditional family home, like a heterosexual couple. 7 times more likely.
I was saying twice. I was way off, wasn't
I was shocked by that. So I want to dig into his sources, and he does have his sources there, but he put that in a documentary that's getting a lot of looks right now. So I think you're spot on what's happening. And as far as I'm concerned, Title 10A is the rule. Everything DHS child welfare does should be what Title 10A says or what administrative code. So that's basically how you're going to apply the law of Title 10A, what you can and can't do. And when I look at this case, all of the laws that DHS broke are so egregious. Number one, from failing to inform the court that this mom was clean, all the testing was clean, the baby was clean, but taking a child for substance abuse.
Would you call that fraud on the court?
Absolutely. I would call it fraud on the court. If you or I tried to do that and we weren't working for the government.
Oh, yeah, I'd get sanctioned $50,000.
Exactly. Failing to even inform the court. And they knew that she was in the care of the Star Clinic and there was a plan for her to be at home. So overriding that to immediately deliver this child to what one of the workers on the case said. These men had 6 or 7 boys through their homes. They were upset with the boys' behaviors. Can you imagine? They were upset with the boys' behaviors, and they requested a baby who had never been in anyone else's home. And lo and behold, Lincoln Lockman was born and went straight to their home. So this worker was.
Let me ask you something right there, Kadie. Do the parents have no say so? Let's say that you're an atheist and I'm a Christian. Do I get to say my child should be put in a Christian home? If I'm a heterosexual and you're a homosexual, do I get to say, you know what? I'm not down with that. My kid needs to, especially if they haven't taken the kid. How do they take the kid? Because correct me if I'm wrong, when they take that kid, even on it temporarily, their goal is to reunite the family, not take the kid permanently. That's supposed to be their goal. So how in the hell do they take the kid and go over there and start this adoption process and start putting them in that home? That's disturbing to me.
Well, it is. And so under Title 10A, state law, the goal is reunification with the parents. For it to not be, that is why we spend so much money with child welfare. You're supposed to come alongside the parents, help them correct any conditions that you've proven make the child unsafe. Can't just be your opinion. They have to meet the statutory definition of what is abuse and neglect. It did not exist here. They ran right over that law, right? So DHS has to prove what they're doing. They put this child straight into this home, and how they handled what you're talking about the parents' deeply held religious beliefs and being culturally sensitive to the family of origin, is the men said that they don't want the parents to know that they're a same-sex couple that has the child. And so DHS said, okay, we won't tell them anything about the people, not a peep, who have their newborn baby. That went on for 6 months. Under the law, foster parents are trained to, and they know from the beginning, that they are to support the goal of reunification. They are told under no uncertain terms that you are a temporary place for these children until they go back. Now, they do say to them, we want you to establish a good relationship with this child, because if something should happen and the parents cannot correct the conditions and we're going on forever, we don't want to leave the child in the system forever. We want you to be ready to adopt. But they know this, and these men said, nope, not supporting this goal of reunification. DHS said, okay. They said, we don't want anyone to know anything about us. So the parents did not know that their child was with 2 men until 6 months in. At 6 months, when this really good permanency worker finally said, I'm not being quiet anymore, I'm not doing what my supervisors say, and she informed them of it, they said just that. This is against our religious beliefs. The supervisors in the case said, nope, at that county level, we cannot remove him. This permanency worker from the beginning was saying, I'm looking at everything that's in the file. This mom wasn't using drugs. She was saying to everyone, why is this child in custody? I don't know. She couldn't get any answers. She was extremely concerned in her visits to the foster home about his well-being. There were medical concerns. There were concerns about nurturance. There were concerns all kinds of things. They would not let her remove this child. So back to what you said, I asked her point blank. I said in the interview, was it trendy to be giving kids to same-sex couples at that time? And she said, absolutely it was. And she said, it was like they put in an order for a baby boy, and now no one is getting that baby boy out of that home. So you're spot on with your assumptions here. Let me tell you a little bit more about what they did that wasn't legal. Again, the vetting. We're not allowed to see their foster care application or their adoptive application because it's hidden behind privacy laws. But what did they answer to? Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been arrested for crimes against children? We don't know that. We don't know who broke the law there to let them have access.
We don't like to assume things, but one can pretty safely assume that we do know they lied on it, because had they told the truth, then you would hope like heck that they wouldn't have, if they said, yeah, we've been convicted of sex crimes, you would think that, well, okay, y'all need to go find, hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back. You would like to think that. So again, I think it would be fairly safe to assume that they lied on their application.
Correct. It's safe to assume. I cannot prove it. Who is at fault here? But it's either DHS or these men committed a crime on that application.
Sure.
So another thing, like I said, they hid the people's information about who had these parents' biological child. You can't do that. That's against the law. They failed to inform the court about a viable kinship placement. So biological dad, his name's Andrew, his brother and his sister-in-law were trying to get this child. And under Title 10A, DHS has to make constant, what's called reasonable efforts to keep each one of these children with kin, with people that are related to them. They stand up in front of the court every time they go to these hearings and say, yes, there's a court report. We've made reasonable efforts. Here's our efforts. They hid this kinship placement. I have all of the emails where this couple, who financially stable, they're raising Lincoln's 3 healthy, wonderful cousins. This was an excellent placement. They were emailing, they were boxed out. Eventually, when they lost contact at the county level because they wouldn't even talk to them about it anymore, they went back to the hotline, the state line hotline, and called in and said, look, I know this is for reporting abuse, but we're trying to get our nephew and no one will talk to us. This is how hard they tried. And yet, DHS stood up in front of a court and said, we made reasonable efforts. And what they did was hide these people. That is completely against the law. And then one of the biggies is at 6 months, 180 days, if DHS has not adjudicated this case, they have not adjudicated and a judge has not said, yes, this child is a deprived child, ward of the court, then Title 10A says that child's no longer in state custody. They blew past the 180 days, and this very good permanency worker who was fighting for these parents, she continued to make sure that they visited with this child. She found that they were very appropriate with this child. She had no concerns about reuniting this baby with his parents. And when she spoke up and she went to her supervisor and said it's 180 days, nothing. They wouldn't do anything. So she printed out the law, and at a visitation, she gave it to the parents, the biological parents, and said, this baby is not in our custody anymore. There was a standoff involved, like you said. More police where these men live, where the foster home is, got involved. And DHS and more police informed the parents, well, sorry, we got a second emergency custody order, DHS did, to keep him in custody so we can go beyond the 180 days. I have every court record from this case because the parents gave it to me, along with, they gave me access to all their medical records. They hid nothing. There is no second emergency custody order to keep this child in custody. So tell me how someone isn't arrested over this within the system.
You only tell you how because nobody has written. So what needs to happen, somebody needs to get a hold of that. Maybe me and you get together, write up the probable cause, take it to the DA. It doesn't have to be, people are not, doesn't have to be law enforcement. We're used to somebody law enforcement. I'm law enforcement, but I'm not law enforcement in Cleveland County. But if you write it up correctly and take it to the DA, they have an obligation to act on knowledge under Kelsey Briggs Act. They have to, if they're aware that the children are being harmed. and these crimes occurred. The crimes occurred in the courtroom of fraud, and again, child stealing, because it's based on the law that they should have gave them back. So really, we just need to write up. As soon as I get through writing my charges on them trying to have me shanked, then I'll get with you and we'll talk about how we can write that up and get it to the Cleveland County District Attorney.
I would love it, because this case, there are so many laws broken by the system that if someone could make DHS correct its mistakes in this case and go back and look how children were harmed in the case and find Lincoln Lockman and find out what happened to Lincoln Lockman and what's going on with him, I feel like we could solve a lot of the problems in the system, because they use every trick in the book, including, so they drag these cases out. Like, we're not going to adjudicate illegally for over 180 days. They drag them out and then they use the calendar, because once this kid's been out of the home a certain amount of time, then they can argue, oh, well, it's in the best interest of the child not to traumatize them and put them back with someone they just don't know yet, even though they're their natural parents. So that game goes on a lot. But then here's the other thing they do. They filed termination of parent rights, right? And let me tell you, these parents did not have good representation. They had to file 3 different times to get a public defender. The system just messed them around at every point. And then when the time came when they started playing we're going to terminate, a judge even had her, when they showed up to try to make their case, had mom put in jail from an old warrant from some other county. So you can't tell me now the court's not participating in trafficking here and covering their decisions from before after a kid's at risk. So then what they say to the parents is, well, here, and this is a court-appointed attorney who's saying this, if you don't relinquish your rights, you will never be able to keep a child again in Oklahoma. That is not what Title 10A says. So imagine this. Imagine you're a 19-year-old woman, right? You're on heroin. Things are horrible. You've experienced horrible things. You give birth to a baby who's addicted. It's taken away from you, and you're offered the services and you cannot get yourself straightened out within that. Sometimes it's 18 months, sometimes it's a little longer, and they terminate your rights, right? Now imagine you're 32 and you're so far beyond this, and God has lifted you out of addiction, and you are self-sufficient, and you have people in your family back around you, and you are perfectly capable of being a parent, and you go to the hospital and you have a child. Are they going to take that child away from you? No, they're not. Why would they say that to parents to convince them to sign it away instead of being relinquished?
You want me to tell you what that is? It's called extortion.
It is extortion.
It's extortion. And there's a charge of extortion by government. And the fact it's a government agency, that is exactly what that is. And so again, I mean, what we're sitting here talking about, frauds on the court, we're talking about child stealing, we're talking about extortion. These are crimes. And again, here's what's funny. If we would go to studying these, this is one case that is, hey, they're doing this all over the state. They're doing it all the time. And guess what? There's a act called the Oklahoma Corruption Enterprise Act, I think. And what it is, it's Oklahoma RICO cases. And when you have organized crime in large spread out, that's what this is. And so again, I've been looking at case after case, whether we're talking about medical, the Mooney case that we just recently saw that everybody's kind of aware of, but I just got contacted, similar, almost identical case, that they come in and threaten the person, you don't go get this medical treatment, we will come in and take your kid. And they said, hey, I really didn't want that medical treatment, but you know what? We had to do it, or else I'm going to lose my kid. So where is it, that these workers get off on saying, you'll do what I say, not what the court says, us, what we're going to tell you, or else I'll come take your kid. Again, that's extortion. That's a threat. That's a terroristic threat. And again, they have the ability to take it out. So that is what, in fact, that's why we have a grand jury petition out in Payne County. And that is why we're fighting, because kids are wrongfully being taken, left in homes of abuse, covering up rape. The court system is doing all of this and we're calling them out from the top to the bottom. And I'm going to tell you, they get nasty. They're a mean, nasty bunch. And then we have the government acting. If it's, DHS, OJA, OCCY, all of these agencies that are supposed to be there to protect. And then we have the district attorneys that should be there to protect. But again, they're willfully and intentionally, they can't be that ignorant. You know what I'm saying? They're willfully ignorant, and they're willfully turning, and sometimes even participating in all of this.
It is. And now you're starting to talk about from the top down. So you have a huge problem with DHS from the bottom up. This really radicalized set has taken over. And like the one very good permanency worker on the Lockman case said, she left the profession, she left DHS, and she left the state over this case. She was so upset about how the Lockmans were treated, and one other case that ended tragically, and no one would listen to her as she tried to protect. So we have that from the bottom up. And what she said is, if you're really trying to reunite families, you're not going to get promoted. She could see it then, back in 2020, 2021, 22. And now we're looking at all these other counties where I see that she's completely correct. I see both supervisors on the Mooney medical kidnapping case. One's a lesbian and one's a gay man, from CPS to the permanency part of it. And they're both involved with, if you go look at their social media, some pretty radicalized stuff, that not fans of the nuclear family, really targeting what was a Moms for Liberty chair leader, right? And on that case, there's only 4 Moms for Liberty chairs in the state. That's a conservative group that sticks up for parents' rights with DHS and with the schools. Of those 4, 2 have had their kids medically kidnapped. Half of those women have had their kids medically kidnapped. That is political targeting. So we're seeing it, these anonymous tips coming in and them coming and taking them. Either one went to the mental health industry and they profited until Sooner Care ran out, and then they kicked him out. She couldn't get him out. They also lied about having a second emergency custody order. They had a hearing of which there is no record to take him into custody. It is shady.
And if that's the mom, if it ain't the mom, I've got an exact same case that I've worked on. It's probably the same case. But
it's the Lewis case, yes.
Yes, that's it. And again, threatened her with, if you don't do this, we'll take your other child.
And there were DAs involved in that. There were judges involved in that. But when we look then, so we have this bottom-up problem where the good workers have all been driven out, and there's a radicalization that's now in charge of the agency that can reach into people's families, Oklahomans' families, and take their children. So that should put a shiver up every parent's spine. But then we have this top-down problem. Jeff Cartmel, who is the DHS director, won't even respond, won't respond about any of these cases. I've given up at this point. They're completely unaccountable, and they don't even have to respond to anything. They've blocked out legislators. You no longer have subpoena power on this thing. You have to go crawling to the Speaker of the House, beg him, which he is a false Republican, beg him for permission to go to Jeff Cartmel at DHS and request the file of one of your constituents who's had their child kidnapped, essentially, legally kidnapped by DHS.
I've got a lawsuit filed on the House and all of on these agencies. So I sued the House over open records, and I have a lawsuit pending on that.
Well, and Jeff Cartmel is personally named in a federal suit that has to do with what happened in Tulsa at what they call sort of their youth justice center. That was the detention part of that.
Oh, yeah, that's been, in fact, that was one of the things that started. So we wrote them a report on that, and they totally ignored it. So there are some that I'm working with that went to them and told them that before all that. So it is in there. They were told, and they said, we don't want anybody in our facility. Oh, we just told you had kids being molested by your worker, and you don't want the police in you don't have a choice, but apparently they did. Got raided, found out it happened. But here's what's funny. Somebody on that lawsuit, if you're listening, I've told about 2 other places this is going on, and they have yet, and we have witnesses ready to testify. And one of them, one of the people, the kids, it's pregnant, so it should be able to be proved whether it's a resident or an employee by DNA. And so again, all of this going on, and DHS, OJA, OCCY, ignoring it, allowing it to happen, our government, our speakers and leadership covering it up. If you call it out, they're going after you. You lose your chairmanship. You take away your bills. They sanction you, try to scare you with $50,000. Guess what? You know, I mean, it's a 1776 moment. We got to decide, take back Oklahoma. We got to take back Oklahoma. Hey, Kadie, we could talk. We already out of time. I always know that we've had a good deal when we can look up and we're already past time. Hey, Bob, is there anything you want to add to this? You've been really quiet, Bob.
No, I was just listening there, but I appreciate you coming on and sharing that information.
I appreciate you having me.
A lot of it, what you said, I had no idea, but I did know a little bit about it.
Well, I greatly appreciate the platform to be able to talk about this. And, you know, the last thing that I'll say is, well, there's a cover up between states, because even the chair up in Kansas of Kansas's committee, House Committee on DCF, which is their Department of Children and Families, that's like our DHS, she attempted to get an inquiry about this up there because the child's in Kansas now with this other man. And their agency just sort of refused to do it. So they're not answering to their elected officials either at all. And then, you know, we've got this tragedy of the home that they put this child in and everything that we described. Over here, I will tell you, the parents of this child, biological parents, they are doing well. They are married. They want their child back. They are raising Lincoln Lockman's full biological little brother. I have been around him on multiple occasions as I interviewed them. He is a healthy, happy young man. He's just a little guy. He's so cute. They're doing a wonderful job at that. Dad is working his tail feathers off to support his family. This is where this child would have been if the government hadn't overreached. Instead, he's at risk of harm every day of his life.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you a lot.
We're going to end there. I do want to say this. I want to give Bob some credit. Bob was making pancakes and they really weren't pretty. I will tell you, they were pretty ugly. And Bob yesterday made some pancakes that he sent me a picture of his pancakes. And Bob is making pretty pancakes now. So I want to say great job, Bob, on your pancakes.
Thank you, JJ.
You passed the wife's test. I showed her. She said you have greatly improved. So I'm getting ready to come up. I stay with Bob when I go to the Capitol. So I wanted to get him making good pancakes before I got up there, you know. So, hey, guys, what we're talking about, honestly, I'm getting to say a new phrase, take back Oklahoma. We have lost our agencies. They are keeping your legislators from getting information. They've got to shut out. Our government is working with them to stop anybody. We've now got, I'm an elected official. I shouldn't have to ask the speaker for a subpoena. This is what this is all about. This is what I'm fighting them about. So guys, you've got to get involved. We've got to stop the stealing of our children, the medical stealing of our children. All of these things are wrong and we got to stand up. I want to encourage you to get involved. Hey, you keep us informed. As soon as I get some of this strode up, me and you going to stay in contact. We're going to write a probable cause. We're going to take it to the DA. We're going to see if we can help these people get their kid back.
I'll give you every bit of evidence I've got. Thank you so much.
Yep, we'll do it.
Hey, JJ.
Bye-bye.
God bless.